Welcome, everyone. Good evening. It's your host, Danny Haiphong. Thank you all for joining today. Please do hit the like button. That helps boost this in the algorithm and gets the message out from our very special guest further and wider. Let us start, though, with asking the question, is Donald Trump folding to China after slapping massive tariffs on Beijing, now as high as 145 to 245%, essentially decoupling? Trump is suddenly claiming that the US and China are quote unquote talking every day to make a deal. He says if China doesn't comply, it's the US that will set the terms. China's foreign ministry, however, calls all of this fake news. Beijing says there are no negotiations taking place and it's China, not Trump, that holds the cards. Here's the danger. Trump's flip-flopping, while a sign of weakness, could also be part of a larger US strategy toward war, while Trump keeps failing over and over again to shift the balance in Ukraine, even after repeated ultimatums to Russia, Kiev, and Europe. To break it all down, we have Brian Berletic of the New Atlas joining us today. Brian, thanks so much for joining the program.
Thank you so much for having me back, and thank you, your audience, for tuning in. I look forward to our discussion.
Me too. Well, let's get right to it then. All right. So, Brian, I know you have been following the trade war debacle that appears to be imploding every single day by the day. I wanted to begin with Donald Trump. So this is what he said about U.S.-China talks relating to trade negotiations.
Mr. President, has there been any direct contact between the U.S. and China on trade at all?
Yeah, of course.
And
Every day.
Mr. President, has there been any direct contact between
every day, he said, every day there's been talks. Now, Beijing says something very different. This is what China had to say relating to the talks regarding, they said if the U.S. truly wants to resolve the issue, it should abolish all unilateral tariffs. There have been no trade talks up until this point. It is all fake news. Now, when confronted with this, Donald Trump said this. He contradicted this completely. He said something to the effect of, here we go. This is what the media had to say.
The U.S. is speaking with China. They're saying it's fake news that trade talks are happening.
Well, they had a meeting this morning, so I can't tell you. It doesn't matter who they is. We may reveal it later, but they had meetings this morning, and we've been meeting with China. And so I think you have, Jeff, as usual, I think you have your reporting wrong.
So, Brian, talk about what you've been making of this, because it appears that while Donald Trump is walking back the tariffs on China, there's also, I think, a bigger picture here. So what's been going on here? What is your take on this kind of just absolute on and off, very inconsistent posture that Donald Trump has been taking toward China, which has really just been leading into a more hostile direction?
Well, what does he mean by when he says we're talking to China? China's a very large country. Does he mean he's talking to people on Temu to order more MAGA hats? I don't know, and he doesn't really make it clear. He's not being specific, and China's denying it. And China has also said they're only going to start talks with the U.S. if they take these tariffs down first. And so, but is this a capitulation by the United States? Right before the show started, we were talking about these talks with Iran, the talks with Russia, and I have repeatedly said before President Trump even stepped foot into office, all of these negotiations are just meant to create the illusion that the U.S. wants diplomacy. In each and every case, whether it's Russia, Iran, or China, the U.S. for decades now has been preparing for war with each one of these countries and working to encircle and contain each one of these countries. So are they really interested in a peace deal or a trade deal or any sort of partnership with any one of these countries? The answer is obviously no. So the diplomacy is just there as a smokescreen where they can maneuver behind toward further encirclement and containment. Even as President Trump is talking about trade deals and having an equal, balancing the trade deficit, all of this, and what is the U.S. military doing here in Asia Pacific, where I am based? They're expanding their footprint. They're working their way into the Philippines. They're expanding their military footprint on the Chinese island province of Taiwan itself. And so, no, I don't think that there is any attempt to make a deal. And I don't think that tariffs were ever a serious attempt to reindustrialize the United States or balance the trade deficit. I believe that it was a provocation. It is meant to not build the United States up to compete with China. I think they know that that's not possible. The goal is to create the conditions in which the U.S. can knock China down to at least America's level or below it. That this is how the U.S. has dealt with the rest of the world since becoming a dominant superpower. And that's how it intends to proceed from this point onward.
Yeah, and I think what's striking is that the Trump administration has resorted to alleging essentially phantom negotiations with China. At the very least, with Iran and Russia, there are, at least you could say, real in the sense that there are people meeting. But with China, this is, I will play it now, volume off, because it is not, it's not translated. I'll read the what the foreign ministry spokesperson for China said about this claim that Trump is talking to China. Here we go. So he said, if the U.S. truly wants to settle the issue through dialogue and negotiation, that of tariffs, it should abandon exertion of pressure, stop intimidation, blackmailing, engage in dialogue with China on the basis of equality, respect, and mutual benefit. The reports are fake news. As far as I know, China and the United States have not held consultations or negotiations on the tariff issue, let alone reached an agreement. Because actually, Brian, what Trump has been saying is that there's an agreement that's already been reached or will be reached at any moment now. But you've said that tariffs and economic war, in this sense, really Donald Trump placed these tariffs on China unilaterally, are about much more than just simply the claims that it's about trade and it's about rebalancing the economic relationship. What's it really about?
It's about isolating China. And so you look at what the United States has done globally. They've placed tariffs on absolutely everyone, even on countries that they have politically captured. What is the purpose of doing that? They know that if they told these countries to do something, they would do it, and especially in regards to Europe. Look at how they're falling on their own sword in regards to the U.S. proxy war on Russia and Ukraine. If they asked them to do something in regards to trade, of course, they would comply to it. So what is the purpose of the tariffs? The purpose of the tariffs are for the client regimes in Europe to go to the European public and say, look, we need to do this and that, whatever the U.S. asks us, to get relief from these tariffs, or our economy will sink even further. And it's sinking in the first place because of their complicity in the proxy war on Russia and Ukraine. And so what they're going to tell Europe to do is, you got to stop doing business with China. They've already been incrementally doing this all along with Huawei. We remember the sanctions. That was an attempt to destroy a Chinese company solely because it was outcompeting American monopolies. This is the paradigm shift that is taking place globally. The United States, for decades and decades, and the collective West, Europe, for centuries, has dominated the planet. It had military, political, and industrial monopolies over the entire world. And now the balance of power is shifting, and this monopoly is no longer possible. And what they're trying to do is eliminate competition and reassert their monopoly. So that's what all of this is about. They have no genuine interest in making any kind of deal with China. The goal is to subordinate China and Russia and Iran, and the talks are just a means to appear to pursue diplomacy. When it does come to war or ever more drastic measures applied on China, they could say, look, we wanted a deal, and the Chinese were just being impossible. And that is exactly what we see taking place right now.
It's interesting, Brian. I'm glad you brought up Europe because, in fact, this is one of the areas actually that all of this bluster and back and forth, whether it's trying to appear to be, and I know you have your a theory on this that we'll get to later because I think it's really important about Europe and its role here under the Trump era. But I do want to bring up that there has been a significant backfiring effect, a boomerang effect on the United States due to these tariffs. And one of these areas is actually Europe. Beijing offers to lift sanctions on MEPs, hoping to revive EU-China investment deal. But not only is there an investment deal about to be re-engaged with between the EU and China, but the EU is also saying that it is open to lifting sanctions on China on key areas that it had agreed to during the Biden and the first Trump regime to essentially follow along U.S. policy. What have you made about this boomerang effect? Because it's interesting. Donald Trump immediately, it hasn't, it was only days that he had to go from a maximalist 145% to 245%, depending on the product, to now, well, they're going to be lower. And we're hearing something that they'll essentially go back to either the first Trump and Biden administrations before this current one, or for certain items, there'll be 100%. What have you made about this?
It's good that you mentioned Trump and Biden. I see a lot of people in the comment section pointing out that Trump is unintelligent, his policies are terrible, which you could say is all true. But the point is, these are not Trump's policies. A lot of what he's rolling out right now was all written in Project 2025, which was published in 2023. And a lot of what was published in that paper was being implemented under the Biden administration, despite Biden and Trump posing as being opposites and having opposing policies, when in reality, there's this continuity of agenda. Now, this idea of Europe reconciling with China or even with Russia or Iran, we've seen this go back and forth over many years with all three of these U.S. confrontations. And the point is, you bring these countries in and you keep them engaged, and you use this as leverage against them. And I'd say the best thing that probably came out of this conflict in Ukraine for Russia economically was independence from the collective West. The collective West uses its relationship with other countries as a tool of coercion. It's not a partnership, it is a tool of coercion, and the end game always is subordination. So when you're engaging with the collective West, with the governments and the special interests that are driving policy right now, you always have to perform this balancing act, trying to extract benefits from this relationship in trade, which there are benefits, but there's always this danger of them using it as leverage against you. So you re-engage with Europe, and then a year or two from now, they're right back to trying to sanction another one of your large companies to try to strangle it out of existence, which is what they did to Huawei. And you're right back to square one again. Why not build constructive partnerships with actual countries that can and want to do business with you, rather than these politically captured proxies of the United States that are just serving as an extension of what is essentially a war, not a hot war, but a gradually escalating confrontation with China.
Yeah. And what's so interesting about this, Brian, is that essentially these tariffs, if they remain where they are, we don't know if they will. It would mean the complete decoupling of the United States from China, which has the entirety of the U.S. financial elite absolutely panicking. And this is why Donald Trump has had to essentially walk them back, ease the markets, kind of calm before the storm. But the truth about these tariffs, Brian, you're exactly correct. They are about much more than just simply economic aims for the United States, as is so claimed. This is the golden age, as Donald Trump keeps talking about. Actually, these tariffs are all about China. And here is Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent. This is what he says is the truth about how the United States is going to relate to China from here on out.
China in particular is in need of a rebalancing. Recent data shows the Chinese economy tilting even further away from consumption toward manufacturing. China's economic system, with growth driven by manufacturing exports, will continue to create even more serious imbalances with its trading partners if the status quo is allowed to continue. China's current economic model is built on exporting its way out of its economic troubles. It's an unsustainable model that is not only harming China, but the entire world. China needs to change. The country knows it needs to change. Everyone knows it needs to change, and we want to help it change because we need rebalancing too. China can start by moving its economy away from export overcapacity and towards supporting its own consumers and domestic demand. Such a shift would help with global rebalancing that the world desperately needs.
Brian, where have we heard that word overcapacity before? Could it be Janet Yellen, Secretary of Treasury under the Biden administration, who said that repeatedly over the last half of Biden's term? But to you, Brian, he said it clearly there. He said China needs to change and we want to help it. The United States wants to help. Doesn't sound like a party that's interested in negotiation or being kind, as Donald Trump has said, and Scott Bessent has said, as they'll be toward China.
Well, the United States demanding a nation change its political or economic system. How novel. I've never seen this done before. And of course, Janet Yellen and the Biden administration were supposedly all puppets of George Soros. And who did Scott Bessent work for before he was folded into the Trump administration? George Soros. He was a fund manager with under George Soros. So all, again, continuity of agenda. And what they're saying is overcapacity, too much manufacturing. And what does that actually really mean? To a monopolist, a billionaire who's extracting wealth from the planet, concentrating it in his own hands at the expense of everyone else on the planet, someone, performing overcapacity. This, to me, as an ordinary person, overcapacity to me sounds more like abundance. What China is doing is making things that the US had monopolized and often priced out of reach of ordinary people. They're producing more of it, better quality, cheaper, making it accessible to absolutely everybody. I'm here in Thailand. I've been here almost my entire adult life, and I've watched the transition from a Western-dominated system and economy that was plugged into this Western-dominated global system. And I've watched the influence of the rise of China and the material abundance that the Chinese economy has not just created for China, but for the rest of the world. Here in Thailand, you could go anywhere in the country, no matter how far away from the major cities, and you could see people utilizing the latest technology, benefiting from it, because it has been made accessible by the supposed overcapacity. And what China's really doing is threatening corporate monopolies in the collective West, their profit maximization, their ability to monopolize, and their ability to control everything. And instead, they're spreading the wealth. If you look at the US and European economic system, it is about corporations maximizing profit at the expense of absolutely everything else, including, in some cases, a corporation's very existence. They will pursue profit to the point where their business becomes unsustainable and serves no other purpose. A car manufacturer just coincidentally is manufacturing cars. The primary purpose of a Western car company is to maximize profits. In China, they have common prosperity. This is in Chinese law, company law, that companies have to serve an actual purpose. They have to serve society. They have to serve national strategy and strategic planning, not just pursue profit blindly at the cost of everything else. And you can see the difference that makes in a society. And here in Thailand, to a degree, there's also this balance between maximizing profit and ensuring people are able to eat and have access to healthcare and housing and transportation, education. I mean, imagine that. Imagine a government creating an economic system that actually is building up the entire country, not just a handful of less than 1% of the population. And so this is what we're actually watching. That's what this is, a battle between corporate monopolies that have dominated the planet for decades, from civilizations that have dominated the planet for centuries, and this balance of power and this reprioritization of purpose over profit. And it's not that people in China aren't also profiting. They absolutely are. People here in Thailand are also profiting. Absolutely. There's hundreds of billionaires in China. So it's not like you're not allowed to be successful and rich, but you cannot do it at the expense of absolutely everyone else. If you have created a system that is creating tremendous wealth for a certain number of people, but then there's other people who have to pick between eating, paying their rent, or going to see the doctor because they think they're sick and gonna die, then you have failed. You have created a failed system. Yes, maybe on paper it's creating tremendous profits and wealth and all of these economic metrics. What is the impact on actual human beings? And so there's a huge disconnect in the collective West. I think they take it for granted, and they, just as they blindly pursue profit, they blindly pursue primacy, even when it becomes irrational and unsustainable. This is what Scott Bessent, a Soros fund manager, is actually saying when he's talking about overcapacity.
Well, similar to how Russia did not stand back and just allow itself to be sanctioned into oblivion, China has not stood back and allowed itself to be isolated via tariffs. So, I'm curious about your thoughts on a numerous amount of moves that China has made in response to this. You have China pulling back from U.S. equity investments. You also have China placing really tough export bans on critical rare earth minerals. And you also have China moving more of its exports and its imports toward the global south. This has been something actually that has been accelerated since the first Trump administration, when tariffs were initially used as a weapon in a trade war, which is when this trade war, quote unquote, actually started. Was Trump won, Biden continued it and worsened it in many ways, and now Trump is accelerating it. So you have China also now, like for example, soybeans. Brazil, major BRICS member, is now going to fill a lot of that gap. So, Brian, what have you made of China's response? That many people have said China has all of the cards because it has the ability to change, and the United States does not.
Yeah, China is not looking for any sort of conflict or confrontation with the collective West, but it is the collective West that for generations has imposed this upon China. And we go back in history, look at the century of humiliation, where the collective West was in the process of colonizing China and had carved off its territory, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau, and the Western powers had their militaries in cities on the mainland, like in Shanghai. And the way they were trying to transform China into what the British Empire had transformed India into. And they remember that, and they understand that this is about self-preservation. This is existential for China. And they would love to do business with the collective West as partners, as equals. But the collective West is not interested in that. They are attempting to impose primacy over the planet, including China, trying to subordinate China. So yes, China needs to understand that reality versus their desire to do business with everyone, to create a multipolar world where nations work together rather than trying to subordinate each other. But the reality is the collective West is still intent on subordinating other nations, maintaining their primacy. So China has to react to this. And they're doing that by creating alternatives. You had The collective West with their monopolies, they don't want to share. They talk about free markets and capitalism. They have no interest at all in actually competing. They're incapable of competing, really, when you look at it. When you look at US companies competing with emerging Chinese companies, they fail almost every single time. You don't really see them succeeding at all anywhere unless they start applying sanctions, banning products outright. The US banning Huawei phones in the United States, but Apple is still allowed to be sold in China. At least I don't know what the status is right now, but up until recently, Apple phones are still sold in China. And so here is China competing. They're competing. They're not trying to strangle America out of existence. They're competing with the United States in terms of business. And it's not some sort of zero-sum competition. There are markets and profits to be made for everybody. This is what China constantly says. The world is big enough for absolutely everyone. Unless you demand control over the entire planet, then that is a problem. So we've talked about in the past, the United States is not just trying to contain and isolate China economically. They're also doing this politically and militarily. They have arrayed their military around the world to begin setting up a potential blockade of Chinese maritime shipping worldwide. Under the Biden administration, they reorganized the U.S. Marine Corps into a solely anti-shipping force to interdict Chinese shipping. The Trump administration now is taking over the Panama Canal, Greenland, with Chinese maritime shipping specifically in mind. This is openly what they say publicly. And politically, the United States continues subverting governments all along China's periphery, here in Southeast Asia, in East Asia. They militarily occupy Japan and South Korea, and they are doing everything that they can to take all of these nations, create a united front against China the same way they've taken Europe, politically captured Europe, especially Eastern Europe, and arrayed it against Russia. So this is the actual fight China's up against. The Belt and Road Initiative, for example, is a global network of infrastructure projects, including land routes, rail and road, to circumvent any sort of maritime blockade the U.S. might impose in the future. So there is a lot of this. The U.S. is going to impose tariffs and try to cut its market off from China. China's diversifying away from the United States, looking for other markets to sell to. And so this is the process. It's a back and forth, and China's reacting to all of these measures the U.S. has taken to try to contain and eventually subordinate China. And so far, looks like the United States is failing, but I would warn people against underestimating the United States' capacity for death and destruction. It's much harder to build, China is building, than it is for the US to bomb still at this point.
Yeah, I think what is a guarantee is that, China definitely will fight until the end. The United States is also looking at this as a war until the end. We will get back to China in a moment, but I did want to go from essentially one big bluff and essentially ultimatums everywhere with regard to Trump and against China to now Russia, because a lot of people are talking about this new peace plan, this final peace plan, the final peace plan that Donald Trump has supposedly leaked, or there's no document of it. It's out there. Some people are calling it the Kellogg plan. But I wanted to first introduce this by, Russia, as all of this talk was happening about a peace plan, it's been really hitting Kiev hard. Our mutual friend, Mark Sloboda, has been talking deeply about how Russia has actually been accelerating its pace on the battlefield and its intensity on the battlefield. Now, this is what Donald Trump had to say about the recent strikes on Kiev. He said, "I am not happy with Russian strikes on Kiev. Not necessary. Very bad timing. Vladimir," first name, "stop. 5,000 soldiers a week are dying. Let's get a peace deal done." But yet, throughout this time of talking about a peace deal, Brian, here is just J.D. Vance. But we heard Marco Rubio say this. Donald Trump backed it all up. the United States is talking about walking away from the Ukraine conflict if this final peace deal is not accepted. Here is what J.D. Vance had told the media.
You said that you were optimistic the other day when you were meeting with Maloney about ending the brutal Ukraine-Russia war. Yeah. At this point, based on where negotiations are, what do you think is next in that process? And do you think that the U.S. should still hang on and take part in those negotiations?
Well, I'm going to echo something Secretary Rubio said, which is, look, we've issued a very explicit proposal to both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it's time for them to either say yes or for the United States to walk away from this process. We've engaged in an extraordinary amount of diplomacy, of on-the-ground work. We've really tried to understand things from the perspective of both the Ukrainians and the Russians.
So, Brian, here's the thing. Many people have been saying this is an ultimatum to Ukraine and Kiev and Zelensky. Trump keeps saying Zelensky's the problem, Zelensky's the problem. But at the end of it, when it comes to Rubio and Vance, it seems to me that they are directing this at Russia. And the final peace plan it's interesting because it has a lot of various elements. Some people are celebrating that there's de facto recognition of Russia's control of the territories. However, Russia's saying that it won't accept peacekeepers, which is in the deal. And it also wants full recognition of these territories because guess what? They are under now Russian law. They have, they voted in through referendums. And that's been true for many years now. So what are your thoughts on this final peace plan? What I see as really an ultimatum to Russia, but a lot of people are saying, actually, no, it's toward Kiev. What's your take?
Well, first of all, if you look at this, the leaked plan and the details within it, it looks very similar to what U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth laid out on February 12th. I hate to keep going back to this, but February 12th this year, Secretary Hegseth said the U.S. needs to pivot to China and Europe needs to take over and freeze this conflict, send troops in on the ground, which is in this leaked peace deal. And they need to expand their military industrial production. They need to double down on supporting Ukraine militarily. And also, the root cause of this is the U.S. and its use of NATO to encircle, contain, encroach upon, and threaten to absorb Russia itself with NATO. And so what has the Trump administration, the only thing that any decision has actually made in regards to NATO is forcing Europe to spend more than double on funding for NATO, expanding NATO essentially. So it's not a peace deal. It is an attempt to freeze a proxy war the U.S. is losing so that they can come back to it later. They need to deal with China. They don't have the material ability to wage a proxy war against Russia and also continue this confrontation, expanding it with both Iran, by the way, in the Middle East, and also primarily China. Now, in order for anyone to even begin to believe that the U.S. is involved in some sort of peace deal with Russia and Ukraine, you have to forget the fact that this is America's war on Russia simply being fought through Ukraine. We remember Victoria Nuland in 2013, at the end of the year, talking about how the U.S. has invested $5 billion on Ukraine's internal political affairs since it gained independence after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And that was to reshape its political system to suit Washington at the expense of the Ukrainian people. And it was also setting the stage for regime change there so the U.S. could install client regime, which happened in 2014. From that point onward, the United States didn't just politically capture Kiev, it also institutionally captured its intelligence agency, according to the New York Times, as well as its military. And there's this U.S. command center in Germany where U.S. generals, not Ukrainian commanders, are making decisions about virtually everything that is taking place on the battlefield, including up to and now under the Trump administration, because there are capabilities that only the U.S. has that allow Ukraine to carry out long-range strikes with the U.S. weapons provided to it that they're still using, including under the Trump administration, and also these long-range strikes into Russia itself. So you hear President Trump condemning Russia for striking at Kiev. The U.S. is almost certainly providing intelligence and targeting information to Ukraine to carry out these drone strikes well over the border, deep inside Russia. So you have to completely ignore all of that to even begin to buy the fiction that the U.S. is engaged in any sort of peace talks at all. It is a U.S. war on Russia, and the U.S. can end it at any time of its choosing. And instead, what it's doing is it's blaming Ukraine. It's saying Russia's being unreasonable. Europe is subverting our peace talks by doing exactly what Secretary Hegseth told them to do.
Not our war. It's not our war.
Yeah, it's not. Plus, we need to pivot, and we need a division of labor. That's what Secretary Hegseth said. That's exactly what they're setting up. But they're using diplomacy as a smokescreen to do it behind and convince people that the U.S. tried to do this diplomatically. It's not their problem. And whatever Europe does, despite the fact that the U.S. controls Europe and tasked them with this, that's on Europe. It's not on us anymore. So this is, again, it's just a proxy war where they're shifting from a collapsing Ukrainian military, and now they're pushing it onto Europe. And they're actually talking about European troops inside Ukraine itself. So it's utterly absurd. And you can never tell whether or not Russia is going to accept this. Just like Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, they almost certainly knew these agreements weren't going to be honored. But I believe at that time, this is not conclusive, but I believe at that time, they felt that they could use the time more effectively to prepare for the special military operation they knew was going to be necessary, that the collective West would be able to use that time. So if they think that they can do that again with some sort of ceasefire now, that's the only condition I can see them agreeing to it, not because they genuinely believe the U.S. wants peace. I'm pretty sure they've learned their lesson by now.
Yeah, and no, I think that's a very astute, Brian. I mean, it's so interesting because one of the most profound developments, regardless of I don't necessarily think this is genuine, but what it looks like on the surface is that nobody accepts what Donald Trump is putting on the table, right? Because you have Kiev, you have Zelensky saying nothing, absolutely nothing, unless there's a ceasefire, unless there is a Minsk Accord implemented immediately, right? A complete ceasefire, a frozen, unless there's like an Istanbul, Syria situation, complete frozen, that he won't even talk to anybody, right? So that's his position staked out. Europe is saying, no, let's continue this 10 years, 20 years. We'll be fighting this forever. And then you have the United States operating as the mediator saying, no, we want peace, but guess what? Nobody wants peace too. But then you look at these terms and yeah, you have, this de facto recognition, the full recognition of Crimea. I don't even see that as Russia is praising it, but I don't really see that as a real starter for anything since that's been done for over a decade. But really, this question of the new territories, the Western media says this is just a gift to Russia, but Russia is warning that a key part of this, the troops, the peacekeeper side of it, that it is a tripwire for World War III. So it's a big sticking point. Your reaction to this, because Sergei Shoigu has said that could easily lead to a World War III situation where Russia feels like it has to use the nuclear option because European troops are stationed at its border.
Yeah. So, well, first, you're talking about recognition of Crimea. By who? By the Trump administration, which itself could change its mind at any moment. And what guarantee is that they won't? And then as soon as the Trump administration is out of office and the next sock puppet is in place, who's to say that they can't just reverse that? Just like they've reversed. I mean, if they can reverse arms treaties unilaterally without evidence, what's going to stop the U.S. from withdrawing recognition of Crimea as part of Russia? And that goes for these other regions that Russia claims as its territory now. Europe isn't going to recognize it. Ukraine isn't going to recognize it. So what meaning does this actually have? It is meaningless. It is meaningless. It is, again, part of this theater of diplomacy the U.S. is engaged in. Now, the European troops going in on the ground, all this is a redux of the Syrian proxy war. The U.S. was waging proxy war against Syria. The proxy war failed. They were losing the proxy war, and their proxies were being overrun by Russian and Iranian-backed Syrian forces. So the U.S. invaded in the east, occupied the east, and Turkey invaded in the north. And they held these buffer zones. And then they continued hollowing out the Syrian economy and its military over many years until the conditions were right to restart this proxy war and finally overthrow the Syrian government, despite Russian and Iranian forces being there backing this hollowed out Syrian government, economy, and military. And this is exactly what they're doing in Ukraine. That is the plan for Ukraine. It is Minsk 3 plus a Syria-style buffer zone. Since 2022, myself and many other analysts have warned that this is what the U.S. would do if their proxy war failed in Ukraine. How many times do people who follow my work regularly remember me saying there's going to be a Syria-style buffer zone in whatever's left of Ukraine to prevent Russia from succeeding in taking over all of Ukraine, which almost certainly is going to be what is necessary to stop this. Because again, what is the end goal here? Why is the U.S. fighting this war with Russia and Ukraine in the first place? Because it demands primacy over the globe, and Russia is one of the pillars of multipolarism. It's a war against multipolarism. So this is the U.S. trying to knock down the Russian pillar that is holding up partly multipolarism. So they're never going to stop pursuing this objective. If they're still pursuing that objective, no deal that they make regarding Ukraine has any meaning, because they will still continue to pose a threat to Russia, and for no justifiable reason, only because they desire primacy over a part of the globe, an ocean away from where the U.S.'s boundaries actually are located on a map. So Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, he's absolutely right. And Russia needs to make this a red line, because we see what happens if you don't stop the U.S. They just keep taking a little bit more. This is what they've been doing with Taiwan until they actually have U.S. troops on an island province of China, sitting there occupying the island. And they will just keep doing this little by little, so little that it really disallows their opponent to make a big reaction. But enough to keep maintaining this momentum where the U.S. has the initiative and is destabilizing a country right on their borders or even within their borders.
Yeah, it's when it comes to these negotiations, Brian, it appears to me that the United States is on the one hand attempting to wash its hands of the conflict, but on the other, essentially trying to do what I think is just absolutely stunning, which is not only separate yourself from the root causes of the conflict, but actually make it seem like there is going to be a pullout from the conflict, when in fact what we've had is constant attempts with all of these plans to find a way to keep the parts of the conflict going that are possible. Because I think what we are seeing is a profound actual weakness here, which is that the United States can't win the conflict right now. And maybe they won't ever really be able to win the conflict, but they can't do it right now. So what has to happen is that it has to be paused. And so there's all kinds of gymnastics about how to get this paused. And what it seems like is that while Russia is playing very nice hardball, it's playing hardball in the sense that it's continuing to fight.
Yes. Well, you said it perfectly. It's America's military-industrial base and the collective West's military-industrial base. This is something that I've been covering and that you've covered on your show for years now. We've noticed and we've been pointing out the real limits the U.S. military-industrial base has. They are incapable of producing the amount of weapons, ammunition, vehicles, equipment necessary for a war of this scale in Ukraine. They don't have enough ammunition to send Ukraine to continue firing artillery rounds at the Russians. And they don't have enough air defense systems. People are saying, ooh, Trump doesn't want to give them Patriot missiles because he wants out of the conflict. No, because he doesn't have enough Patriot missiles to send them. And this was something that began under the Biden administration. And now it's just being, the excuse has been twisted and changed But the underlying reality is the U.S. simply doesn't have enough Patriot missiles. They need them for the war they're already fighting and preparing to expand in the Middle East, and this growing confrontation with China in the Asia-Pacific region. And so what they're doing is, like you say, they need to freeze this. They have no intention at all of stopping it. That's the last thing they want to do. And they want Europe to be the ones to take the risk in going into Ukraine and freezing it. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. They don't know, but they don't care because it's not the US on the line, it's Europe that's on the line. They don't care about Europe. Europe is just another proxy. And I've heard people say the Trump administration isn't approving any new weapons deals with Ukraine. They're not sending any more weapons, but this is untrue. I've seen contracts being drawn up between U.S. arms manufacturers, European countries, exactly as U.S. Secretary Pete Hegseth laid out, again, in February this year, selling the weapons to Europe and then Europe transferring them to Ukraine. So an intermediary, but it's still the U.S. making weapons and sending them to Ukraine to continue this proxy war they're pretending they want peace and they want out of. So again, look through the rhetoric. People who are trying to discern what is going on right now with U.S. foreign policy by just listening to whatever President Trump and his administration are saying, instead of looking at the policy papers and the actual decisions being made, the contracts being drawn up, people who are doing that, it's the absolute worst way to try to figure out what's going on. Because these politicians, and that's exactly what they are, they're politicians, they're not actually policymakers. Their whole goal is to manage public perception, not actually tell you what's really going on. And a lot of people say President Trump is completely unpredictable. Well, matching his words up with what is happening in reality is very difficult to do. But again, if you go back to the policy papers, Project 2025 laid out very clearly, and this was all the way back in 2023, we're going to take the conflict, dump it on Ukraine, and pivot to China. And that is exactly what they have been doing from the very beginning, from the first day President Trump entered office, all the way up until now through these fake peace talks that I don't think Russia buys for even a moment. That is what they've been doing. They're dumping the conflict on Ukraine, have them freeze it. The U.S. will support indirectly while they pivot to Iran and China. So this is what's actually happening. No matter how badly we want it to be otherwise, this is what is happening.
Yeah. And on Russia's side, how have you evaluated how it's reacted to all of this? Because I think there are many people who look at this at the surface level and they see that one, Trump is saying nice things to Russia. He often says that Russia is easier to deal with. He's also on the opposite side, Russia is saying, well, you know, they understand the root causes. They're at least trying things like this. But on the other hand, there have been some who have even assumed, I think on Redacted, there was an interesting piece done where the analysis was that Vladimir Putin put in an Easter ceasefire because Donald Trump was angry at him. And what I find so incredible about this is that it seemed from the very beginning, it doesn't seem like Russia has really wavered on any of its terms and hasn't been pushed to do anything by the United States. So what have you made about Russia's response to what is this kind of cycle of, well, we're doing diplomacy, and now the United States saying, okay, this is our ultimatum. We put the plan on the table, or this so-called final peace plan, and now we're going to walk away if you don't do it. It doesn't seem like Russia is taking the bait. What's your thoughts?
I agree. And you know, Russia has proposed on many occasions ceasefires with Ukraine unilaterally, including under the Biden administration. There was a Christmas ceasefire proposed that Ukraine rejected out of hand and never adhered to. And this ceasefire, the agreement to observe a ceasefire on energy infrastructure, all of this is meant to demonstrate to the world that Russia is interested in diplomacy and that it is, if not the United States, even though they know that it's the United States, they know it's the U.S. If the New York Times has admitted to this, surely Russia knows that it is the United States picking the targets and simply using Ukrainians to hit those targets, including in Russian territory, internationally recognized Russian territory. So they understand all of this. They're being patient. They want to maintain the appearance of giving diplomacy a chance because this is part of the game the U.S. is playing. The U.S. wants to make it look like, and President Trump goes out of his way to appear to favor Russia because they're trying to paint Russia into a corner where a deal so good has been presented to them. Only a bloodthirsty, irrational Russia would continue on with its war and reject the agreement. This is the corner they're trying to push Russia into. And you can see it from a mile away. That's what they're doing, including with President Trump, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Vice President J.D. Vance, all saying, we've tried everything and they're all just being impossible. And I don't know what else we could possibly do. Again, Russia knows this is a U.S. war against Russia simply through the Ukrainians. So they're trying to do their own version of this, where they're trying to appear to be the rational one, giving diplomacy a chance, and that it's the U.S. and its proxies who are impossible to make any sort of compromise with. And then when they have to continue the war, they will say, we gave it a try. You saw us give it a try. We agreed to these ceasefires and Ukraine refused. And so this is why we have to continue. And so it's a two-way game. And I agree with you. I don't think Russia buys this at all. I think there are, you see people in Russian media who seem to be buying it. I don't know if they were told to go along with it or if they genuinely are being swept away. I know a lot of people in the alternative media have been completely swept away, honestly. And they're not being disingenuous, they're not being dishonest. They've honestly been swept away by the Trump administration, its propaganda, its rhetoric, its false attempt at diplomacy. They are believing it because they want to believe it. They want to believe in a world where we're not teetering closer and closer to World War III. But unfortunately, that doesn't matter. It only matters what is really happening. And yes, this is the U.S. Setting Russia up for failure, trying to corner them. And then when they say walk away, what does that mean? They're not going to be involved at all in Ukraine. Unlikely. Just like you remember in President Trump regarding the proxy war in Syria, he said, "I'm cutting all the programs." Yeah. Blah blah blah. They continued all of it because the collapse in last December wouldn't have been possible otherwise. So same game.
Yeah, walking away when essentially the United States is the Ukrainian military. Without the United States, there really is no Ukrainian military for however many militaries they've gone through. If it was not for U.S. support, it's similar to Israel. If we said, well, walk away from Israel, well, most people's analysis is, if the United States walked away from Israel wouldn't be able to last very long because it doesn't have the industrial capacity to replace the U.S.'s assistance, which is why it needs that $4 billion plus in military aid from the United States. Well, Ukraine is arguably deeper in terms of its dependency on U.S. largesse, and walking away, unless you're going to actually do what you have said, Brian, the thing to do, which is to say, okay, we're going to end the conflict by actually putting in the policies that will roll this back, demilitarizing, actually pull out of NATO, or actually get rid of NATO, right? Yes. These are the things you could do if you really cared about, well, we're going to reorient toward a U.S. first or America first, quote unquote. Well, that's a big way to do it. No,
absolutely. Withdraw from NATO, disband NATO, take every single U.S. troop in Europe and don't send them to Asia Pacific to threaten Russia's neighbor to the east, China. Send them back to the United States. The only place on planet Earth where they should be right now is within U.S. borders. Do that, and then I would believe that you have any sort of interest in global peace. You're gonna keep thousands of troops in Europe, or you're gonna continue selling these weapons to Europe. You openly, publicly told Europe to continue preparing for war with Russia while pretending you want peace with Russia. It's absurd, and I honestly don't know how anyone is still buying this. But you're absolutely right, Danny. There are things the U.S. can do to prove that they're acting in good faith, and they haven't done even one of them. Not even one of them. They've done things that are completely costless to them, that they can reverse at any time of their choosing, as they have done repeatedly all throughout history, regardless of who's in the White House and regardless of who controls Congress, and because it is one single agenda. As long as American foreign policy strives for global domination, it cannot be trusted. None of its deals have any meaning at all except as a delaying tactic to buy them time to get the pieces in place so that the next time they wage proxy war with Russia, they get what they want. Also have to remember that this isn't necessarily about beating Russia in Ukraine. It's about keeping Russia tied down in Ukraine so that when they attack Iran, they don't have additional military resources to aid Iran. We already saw this play out in Syria. Russia was tied up in Ukraine. They did not have the resources as they did before they got tied up in Ukraine to defend the Syrian government from collapse. And they're doing the same thing to China. And so this is, and remember, I keep talking about all of these policy papers, Rand Corporation's paper, extending Russia, all of those options, attacking Russia economically, attacking Russia by destabilizing Ukraine, by destabilizing Georgia, Central Asia, the Baltic states, all of this in combination to overextend, pin Russia down, and give the U.S. the initiative, not just against Russia itself, but against its allies. So all of these people who think the U.S. genuinely wants peace with Russia, but at the exact same time engineering the same conflict with Iran and China, both of whom are Russian allies, it doesn't make sense. In reality, doesn't add up. It is still a war on Russia itself, just a little bit more indirectly.
Well, speaking of war, I wanted to actually move back to China because, as the war in Ukraine rages on and as the trade war essentially implodes, the United States, it's not a card that it's going to be able to play at least as effectively as it thought it could. We do have actually, amid all of this, amid this Ukraine conflict, amid this constant threats on Iran, regardless of all of that, what is not being talked about is how the United States is militarily preparing for war on China, actually, literally. So the United States recently made, actually, Pete Hegseth a state visit to the Philippines. And what's interesting about the Philippines is that there's a lot of talk about Taiwan from the Filipino government, as well as the United States. And here is Taiwan news. There is a Super Bowl, they're calling it, of joint U.S. drills with the Philippines called Balakatan 2025. Here is the report of this massive military exercise that has just got underway.
The U.S. and the Philippines have begun their annual joint military drills amid tensions with China. The head of the Philippine Armed Forces spoke at the opening ceremony for the exercises called Balikatan, or shoulder to shoulder.
These initiatives are not solely about demonstrating power. They epitomize partnership in action, dedicated to safeguarding people, preserving peace, and preparing for future challenges.
More than 14,000 Filipino and American soldiers are taking part in this year's Balikatan exercises around the Philippines. The drills come amid increasing confrontations between Beijing and Manila in the South China Sea over their competing territorial claims. Other countries, including Australia and Japan, will also take part in the exercises. They include air and missile defense drills and maritime strikes and will run until May 9th.
So, massive drills, Brian. But not only this, I want to pull this up because it also, the U.S. is escalating within Taiwan. The U.S. has deployed a ship killer missile near Taiwan. It has deployed the anti-ship missiles to the Luzon Strait near Taiwan for the first time as part of annual military drills designed to prevent naval invasions. The Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction Systems, NMESIS, are being airlifted to multiple islands in the Philippines, Batanes Island chain, less than 120 miles from southern Taiwan. Naval News has described as ship killers. They are ground-based missile launchers designed to strike against ships at distances of over 115 miles. So, Brian, these are major escalations. What have you made of this U.S. buildup toward war, especially amid this trade war, which has most people's attention at this time?
Well, what did I say? I said the Biden administration transformed the Marine Corps and by extension the U.S. Navy into an anti-shipping force, and that was all done under his presidency. And now you have the Trump administration making use of that. So absolute uninterrupted continuity of agenda. That is exactly what the force was built and designed for, and that is exactly how President Trump is seamlessly fits into his form. What a coincidence. And I'm wondering how long until these Filipino military commanders, so excited about standing shoulder to shoulder with the U.S., their former colonial masters. The U.S. literally colonized the Philippines. They only got their independence, supposedly, after World War II. How long until he has an American flag on his shoulder instead of a Philippine flag? What has been done to the Philippines is such a tragedy. It is a country with a much larger population than Thailand, but a much smaller GDP, precisely because the U.S. has been playing these games with the Philippines, fashioning it into a Ukraine of Southeast Asia, if you will, and for Washington's benefit, completely, absolutely at the expense of the Philippines. Before this, the Philippines, for a very short period of time under President Duterte, they were greatly cooperating with China. China was actually in the process of building desperately needed modern infrastructure across the Philippines. And then since Marcos was installed into power, politically captured by the US, those projects were literally canceled. And instead, they took public funding and they are using it to build up missile bases with missiles designed to point at China. China is the Philippines' largest export market and source of imports. So they are pointing missiles at their most important trade partner, their best chance at modernizing their nation and catching up and actually developing. And instead, they're allowing themselves to be subordinated by the United States because of the US's ability to politically capture and control a targeted nation. So we all heard about how Trump dismantled the NED and USAID and Voice of America. Nonsense. All of that has been consolidated under the State Department. The tools have been streamlined and sharpened, and they're still being put to use. And the Philippines is a perfect example of this in action. And they're trying to do it across the rest of Southeast Asia. And again, like I said, if they could have their way, they would make every nation in Southeast Asia another Philippines. And have all these countries spiraling into poverty while taking what resources they do have and putting it into U.S. weapons to point at China. China, which is lifting all of these other nations out of poverty and helping them develop at accelerated rates. So it is an absolute tragedy for the Philippines, and it represents, I would say, an existential threat to the entire region. Because any one of these countries collapsing and being used as a proxy by the U.S. threatens peace and stability and prosperity for everyone else in the region, and I would say even all around the globe.
Yeah. And, this is happening right now. It is preparations for a literal war with China, Brian. Talk about that connection, because a lot of people don't understand, like, why Taiwan? Because even Balikatan, these military exercises, have at their heart Taiwan. You heard the report about the anti-ship missiles. That is about the Philippines and getting close to the Philippines in order to supposedly protect Taiwan from China. So why Taiwan, Brian? Because it appears to be that the war that the U.S. is really preparing for in the South China Sea, in the Asia Pacific, is about centering Taiwan. And we know about all the war games that even Pete Hegseth, what did he say? The U.S. loses all these war games, but yet they keep wargaming.
Yes. And the reason why is because the U.S. doesn't necessarily need to win an all-out military conflict with China. All they need is to create a large enough pretext to justify a global maritime blockade against Chinese shipping. That's what I believe. That is what the goal is. That is what it has said in policy papers spanning decades now. There are papers from the early 2000s that talked about cutting off Chinese maritime shipping, preventing China from being able to protect its civilian shipping around the globe. And the U.S. does have this advantage right now, and they are rushing to use it while it lasts. It's not going to last forever. The U.S. military spans the globe. We always talk about the hundreds of bases they have all around the globe. Their Navy sails all around the globe. The Chinese military is incapable of projecting military power anywhere close to the same level the U.S. has. It's essentially, and U.S. policy papers admit this, while the politicians lie to the world and say China is a military threat to the world, they brag about how China's military is confined to defending China and China alone. They're upset about China militarizing the South China Sea because they understand that what was that in reaction to? What is going on in the South China Sea? There are two things going on in the South China Sea. Number one, maritime shipping. And who is that maritime shipping between? China and all of its trade partners in the region. Just like the Philippines, almost every other country in the region counts China as their largest trade partner. So is the U.S. in the Philippines to help the Philippines protect their maritime shipping with China from China in the South China Sea? It doesn't make any sense. There are these maritime disputes, but these maritime disputes have always been going on. It's nothing new. And it's not just with China. Philippines has maritime disputes with Malaysia and Indonesia and Vietnam, and they get very heated. But otherwise, these very localized, heated disputes, all of these countries have very good, I would even say friendly relations with one another. They trade with one another. Their leadership visit each other as if nothing is going on. And because these maritime disputes always happen and it's always kept well under control, the U.S. has inserted itself into these disputes, and exclusively only if the dispute involves China, and they're trying to escalate it into a regional or even global conflict. They can justify militarizing the region with their own military and building up this confrontation with China. Now, Taiwan specifically, it helps for people to understand. A lot of people have this misconception because the Western media, conservative, liberal, doesn't matter, in concert, they lie to the public about the status of Taiwan. Taiwan is part of China. Every country that does business with China observes a one China policy. One China means there's one China. Taiwan is part of China, and there's only one government of China, the People's Republic of China, based in Beijing. And if you read the Shanghai Communique from the 1970s, the U.S. agreement with China, they say not only do they recognize that everyone on both sides of the strait count Taiwan as part of China, they don't challenge that position. So a lot of people try to leave out that last bit and say, well, they recognize that they believe that, but they themselves don't believe that. No, they said in the communique, they don't challenge that. So they agreed to that. But ever since then, unofficially, they've been undermining China's sovereignty over Taiwan by selling it military weapons, by encouraging separatist political parties that the U.S. funds and just maneuvered and keeps in power, by co-opting, capturing, polluting their information space with separatist ideology, and by beginning to place U.S. troops on Taiwan itself. So during the first Trump administration, the U.S. began putting troops there. By right, China, that is an act of war. China could have started a war with the U.S. right then and there, but they didn't. They're being patient. They're showing restraint. If it was the other way around, if it was China putting Chinese troops on Catalina Island off of California's coast, it would have been war. It would have been instant war. So it shows you who is the troublemaker and why. Why are they so obsessed with Taiwan? Again, not just to deny, not just to complicate and raise the cost for China, to extend China in the same way they're extending Russia and Ukraine. Not just to deny them this source of, the semiconductor industry on Taiwan, which makes a huge amount of business with the rest of China and imports raw materials from China necessary to keep that industry going, by the way. But also, again, like I said, this is you look at the conflict in Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia and how the U.S. used that as a pretext to coerce the rest of the world to completely cut off all ties with Russia, cut all trade, place sanctions on them. The U.S. literally blew up pipelines to prevent Russia from sending energy to Europe. This is what they want to do with China. And they need something drastic to serve as a catalyst for imposing these harsh restrictions, to enforce this isolation of China in ways the tariffs are attempting to at least prime the way for. A conflict would actually seal the deal. So this is what it's a combination of reasons, and these are among the primary reasons.
Well, it's interesting, Brian. You have major admirals, generals, those who have a relationship, either a continued relationship in the Indo-Pacific Command or a former relationship, and they say something very different to you, that also reveals just how important this war with China is and how much panic that they are trying to engender in order to escalate it. Here is the National Interest, which is an establishment media outlet. China escalated military exercises around Taiwan in 2024. Admiral Samuel Paparo, if you know Samuel Paparo, he is a China hawk, a champion in the Indo-Pacific Command. This is what he had to say. China continues to prepare for an invasion of Taiwan, top military officer in the region told lawmakers. In 2024, China's military increased its activity around Taiwan 3 times. The Communist Party of China maintains its claim over the small neighbor and continues to prepare for forceful reunification. Quote, Beijing's aggressive maneuvers around Taiwan are not just exercises, they are dress rehearsals for forced unification, said Navy Admiral Samuel Paparo, who is now the commander of the Indo-Pacific Command. He said now escalated military pressure is up 300%. 3 military drills, of course, as opposed to 1. Last year, I stated this balance of power in the Indo-Pacific was shifting in China's favor. Since then, the Communist Party of China, this is why I brought this up, because it has to do with the Philippines, has significantly increased its coercive activity toward Taiwan and the Philippines. So they're tied together. So, Brian, they are sounding the alarm for forced reunification. That is what China is doing, supposedly. But what is China actually doing? Because I think that there's a deeper story here behind not only why China is increasing its military activity and spending, but also what it might be doing to engender the ire of the United States.
I mean, Taiwan is part of China, so China is entitled to do whatever it wants in and around the islands. And they have showed tremendous restraint and patience regarding the status of Taiwan and solely because of U.S. interference. People are always saying, no, Taiwan is independent. They have the right to be independent. There's nothing that takes place on that island that isn't determined in and for Washington. People have to keep that in mind. Just like we were talking about the regime in Ukraine, Israel, all of these proxies of the U.S. will not continue existing without constant and substantial U.S. support, and Taiwan is no exception to that. So, if left alone, if the U.S. just left the status quo where Taiwan has this status because of circumstances of history, eventually it would have reunified with China. It may already have reunified with the rest of China because economically, the economy on the island of Taiwan is so dependent on the rest of China. If you look at where they export and import from, it is mostly from the rest of China. And in ways the United States could never replace. There is no alternative for the rest of China. So just that alone, plus China has all of these laws and measures put in place to make it exceptionally easy for people living in Taiwan to also go to the mainland, and not just go to the mainland and live in the mainland, but to do business on the mainland. And so a lot of business owners in Taiwan do a lot of business with the rest of China. And so if you just left that way, reunification was a sure thing. So the U.S. is betting on separatism to delay it and raise the cost for unification, if not trying to stop it, at least raise the cost significantly. But as it turns out, China's military capabilities in and around Taiwan, its own island province, are growing to such an extent, its military is modernized to such an extent that the threat of U.S. military force is becoming more and more manageable. So as each year goes by, all of the advantages the U.S. had in regards to maintaining Taiwan as a pressure point against the rest of China is diminishing. And so this is the U.S. struggling to maintain this leverage. And again, it's why is it involved? People have to ask themselves, why is the U.S. involved with Taiwan at all in the first place? It is on the other side of the planet. It is right off the coast of the rest of China. It is on the other side of the Pacific Ocean from the United States. How is it America's business? It isn't. And if it was the other way around, no American would tolerate it. And yet in the mind of so many Americans, because of how effective American propaganda is, they somehow think that this is not just acceptable, but absolutely necessary. It's It's amazing. And this demonstrates the danger of propaganda and the importance of participating in, I guess you would say, this information warfare.
Yeah, and yes, and when it comes to U.S. military aggression toward China, Brian, there's this connection to what really is a decline of the U.S.'s primacy, as you call it. We could call it its hegemony. We could call it its overall. We could just call it a declining empire, so to speak. But the United States is facing a global crisis that it itself has made, where it is becoming more and more isolated on the world stage because of the dynamics of its own system. And this is what's happening. When we talk about a trade war, what we're really talking about is not a war at all. China has essentially, quote unquote, won this war by doing nothing related to war. It built robust relationships with countries around the world that are complementary, focusing on its development, kicking the U.S.'s behind in essentially all areas of tech development and infrastructure development. And here's what's happened. In 2000, the United States used to be the world's leading trading partner of the vast majority of countries around the world. There you see in red the countries that China in 2000 was the number one trade partner of. In the blue is the U.S. Now look at 2024. Most of the world, if not the whole world, outside of Canada, Mexico, parts of Latin America, and Western Europe, are trading with China as their number one partner. So this is a dramatic change on the world stage. It includes the Belt and Road Initiative. It includes all these multilateral mechanisms. And also, Brian, it includes what a lot of people are bringing up in my audience. They're saying, what about this technological revolutions that China is undergoing? Thorium, we're on and on and on, just making innovations and advancements that the United States doesn't have capacity over. Actually, the United States is sanctioning and tariffing these innovations. For example, like electric vehicles, becoming the world leader of car production generally, but electric vehicle production wholly, to the point where the U.S. before Trump tariffed, I should say, electric vehicles in China 100%, essentially decoupling in order to prevent competition, which the U.S. isn't even really waging. There is no competition. So, Brian, your reaction to kind of these root causes, as to take the words of Russia and Putin, Lavrov, they always talk about root causes. Well, the root causes of this conflict with China, your thoughts?
America's desire to dominate, its inability to accept another nation, especially a non-white nation, from surpassing it. And if you look at this logically, by the way, Daddy, you showed that map, and you see all of the red all across Eurasia, and especially Southeast Asia, and where the South China Sea is located. So does anybody actually believe that the U.S. Navy is in the South China Sea to protect the freedom of navigation of ships that are all almost certainly engaged in trade? The one below, 2024. Does anyone think the U.S. is in the South China Sea?
I'm just pointing at where the South China Sea is. This is what we are talking about. We're talking about this long area that, yes, extends outward. All the countries are top trading partners with China.
Yeah, so the reason the U.S. Navy is actually there is to threaten it, and if possible, disrupt and stop it. And again, this is in all of their policy papers. If they could just create a war big enough, short of nuclear war, but a war big enough, maybe a year, a 2-year war, whatever, they don't even care how it ends, just as long as they can create hostilities in the region, convince shipping companies to just avoid the whole area, China, essentially. They could basically blockade China and collapse its economy. And so that's what it's about. And Danny, you're talking about technology. Yes, this is all because of technology. The collective West has this ingrained belief that they are inherently superior to everyone else on Earth. They are inherently superior to Africa, Latin America, Asians. They're all inferior, subhuman, depending on who you talk to. And in reality, the West enjoyed the benefits of historical circumstances. The Industrial Revolution began in the West, and they benefited from that. And there was tremendous technological and thus economic and military disparity because of that. But as time went on, from the World Wars through the Cold War up till now, technology has proliferated. And it turns out that people in China are just as capable of understanding, using, and even advancing technology in ways the collective West now is incapable of because of the systemic factors in China that allow it to surpass the US in terms of research, development, and innovation. The fact that they're graduating more STEM graduates every year, for example. Infrastructure is another example. It turns out that the rest of the world is just as capable of using technology and creating tremendous power. Now, what are the deciding factors? It's not the West and their military and their technology, because now everyone has the technology. Everyone has the ability to produce weapons that they can use to defend themselves. What is now the deciding factor? The deciding factor is whether you as a nation are investing in the human resources within your nation. That is the most important resource, is the human resource. Are you educating them? Are you taking care of their health with universal health care? Are you providing them housing? Are they struggling to survive, or are they able to work and innovate and contribute to the building of society? And in China, the answer is yes. In the United States, the answer is absolutely not. And it gets worse and worse each year. And it doesn't even have to be this way. The United States could be rational and accept its place in the world. It is 4% of the global population. It could accept a proportional role within the rest of the world among other nations rather than imposing itself on all other nations. All of this is a consequence of the US refusing to accept that reality and insisting that it's still somehow inherently superior, no matter how much evidence adds up to the contrary. And so this is why we're at the verge of all of this war. This is why there is instability. This is what is impeding, not propelling, human progress at this point. The West has become the greatest obstruction to human progress right now on planet Earth. And the most ironic part about all of this, you have people like J.D. Vance. Oh my God, I'm a Christian. I'm such a big Christian. And Donald J. Trump, we're all Christians. I don't know if people understand this.
Remember when Rubio had the cross?
The Ash Wednesday cross on his forehead, really literally wearing his religion on his skin. Pete Hegseth also this Crusader cross.
Right.
What is the most important virtue of Christianity that all other Christian virtues are built on? Humility. And that is the one thing no one will ever accuse anyone in the US government, all of these so-called Christians, of being is humble, having any sense of humility. And if they did, they would open the door to the progress and the greatness of America that they're always promising, but in actuality, having no intention of ever making good on. And so that's the ultimate irony there, that if they actually were Christians and upheld humility, they would see their proportional place in the world, in God's creation. They would stop pursuing dominance over everyone else. Yeah, I remember Jesus talking so much about dominating everyone around you. That's such a reoccurring theme in the New Testament, right?
Absurd, yeah.
So if they actually adhered to that, America would look completely different. And the irony is they're always accusing China of being so godless. But if you talk to Chinese people, they're some of the most humble people on earth. And people in Asia in general have this ingrained sense of humility and sense of collective responsibility. Like there's individualism, but there's also this greater sense of collectivism where you're playing a role in a greater group. We're human beings. We're a social species. You cannot deny this. It's a factor of evolution. We're a social species, and we have to work together to accomplish anything. And people in Asia seem to get that, and people in the collective West at one point did actually understand this. I mean, when you look at the United States when it was at its strongest, there was strong collectivism and individualism combined, but that's all gone. And it's because of this blind pursuit of power and profit that's blinded them to even reality. If you don't know what's going on in reality, you cannot plan properly. You cannot put a plan together that makes sense and is achievable or sustainable. And this is what we're seeing the consequences of. And because the US has so much momentum, power and wealth and momentum, It is so dangerous because these people who are blind they're basically driving a giant bus into a crowd of people. I mean, you could kind of compare it to that. They're blind and they're driving a bus, a huge multi-ton vehicle speeding into a crowd, and they're not even looking at where they're going. This is U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah, and I want to just play now for your reaction to it. Exactly what Pete Hegseth said before he before he took the official position, before he was started his tenure as Secretary of Defense. Here's what he said about war games with China.
The Pentagon is in the book the exact amount of years, but in the past X number of years, 10, 12, 15, the Pentagon has a perfect record in all of its war games against China. We lose every time inside the Pentagon war games. We know what our real capability. You see, we didn't even get to this part of the war on warriors. I mean, the military-industrial complex, the way we procure weapon systems. We're always, the way our system works, the way our bureaucratic system works, where the speed of weapons procurement works, we're always a decade behind in fighting the last war. Whereas China, we have what did Rumsfeld say? You go to the war, the army you have. We have the army. China's building an army specifically dedicated to defeating the United States of America. That is their strategic outset. Take hypersonic missiles. So if our whole power projection platform is aircraft carriers and the ability to project power that way strategically around the globe, and yeah, we have a nuclear triad and all of that, but a big part of it. And if 15 hypersonic missiles can take out our 10 aircraft carriers in the first 20 minutes of a conflict, what does that look like?
Yeah.
I mean, and if they've already got us by the balls economically, which you pointed out very well with our grid.
So Brian, this is not the Pete Hegseth we've been seeing as Secretary of Defense. But your thoughts about this, because he speaks some truths here, but overall, your assessment of the United States' way of war toward China.
Yeah, well, he's admitting all of this, but if you listen to the whole interview, it's kind of funny because he's talking about how evil China is because it is central planning and it's communist. And what his conclusion is basically, we need to adopt all of that whole system so that we catch up and compete with China militarily. And he's talking about how the Chinese military is designed to defeat the United States. But is that true? Is it? And in what way? He's talking about aircraft carriers. Is China talking about using hypersonic missiles to sink American aircraft carriers at port in the United States off the East Coast? No, he's talking about defeating America off of China's shores. What is the United States military doing off of China's shores in the first place? So he's admitting that America is the hostile aggressor and China seeks to defend itself against this hostile aggressor. Makes perfect sense to any rational person who sheds their bias and just looks at this rationally and what is going on. And wouldn't the United States do the exact same thing? The United States military is not designed to defend the United States. It's designed, and they even say this, to defend American interests. And what is an American interest? Things in other people's countries that don't belong to America, but that America wants. That's what American interests are outside of America's own borders. And so he's, if you listen carefully, you can hear him admitting to all of this. And I bet he doesn't even understand what he's actually laying out there. And I don't think it was because a lot of people noticed all the bottles of alcohol in the background. I don't think it's just because of that. I think he and people like him are just so blinded by their own sense of unwarranted sense of superiority that they can't see reality for what it is. So yes, and so American. Again, I don't think America's military is designed or capable of defeating China militarily off of China's own shores. I don't think that that's the case. I think what they're looking at is how can they use these capabilities in a way that China cannot counter, and that would add up to the global maritime blockade. And they say in their policy papers, we can blockade China, in the Indian Ocean, at the Panama Canal, Greenland, all of these places where China cannot project military power. And we don't need to fight and win any sort of armed conflict in Asia Pacific itself. We just need to create hostilities that deter shipping from moving through these waters. And I don't think that they would be beneath or above. I don't think they would be above sinking, targeting civilian maritime shipping to deter it. And look at what's going on in the Black Sea, for example, the use of these maritime drones by Ukraine to attack Russian vessels. So that's what they're talking about. And they've got companies working on maritime drones specifically for this purpose. So this is the threat China faces. This is why they've invested so much in the Belt and Road Initiative. This has been in policy papers for decades now. So China is well aware of this and reacting to it, responding to it. And people like Pete Hegseth see that and they think, how dare China defend itself against our attempt to encircle, contain, and subordinate them? They should be subordinated to us because we are inherently superior. They're inferior. We will not accept a non-white nation surpassing not just America, but the collective West. But that is what is happening. And what happens when you have people with that immovable mentality coming into contact with immovable reality? Chaos.
Yeah.
Disaster.
Yeah. And Pete Hegseth admits that the war games are a failure. At the same time, China, a big reason for the Belt and Road Initiative is to not only strengthen its maritime shipping routes and its connectivity at sea, but and by ocean, but also through land routes in order to bypass completely the U.S.'s attempt to choke it off through naval means. So all that is to say is that now, yes, you have over 40 plus countries in the Belt and Road Initiative. You have the vast majority of the world trading with China, including its top partners, all across ASEAN and Asia Pacific, trading with China as their number one partner. And you even had South Korea, Japan, despite all of their participation in U.S. military exercises and provocations toward China in many degrees, economically, they refuse to decouple fully because of the disaster that it would be. So in a lot of ways, the United States is running out of cards or is completely out of cards. And that means, Brian, all these war games, all of these provocations, all of this military buildup, in my opinion, the only conflict that the U.S. and China will fight directly against each other is a nuclear conflict, because there is no reason or way. First of all, Pete Hegseth said the U.S. can't win that kind of war. China is not going to let itself be invaded. Why does it have a nuclear deterrent in the first place? So, Brian, your thoughts on this conclusion that I come to when I hear U.S.-China war?
I would be very careful. This is something that I had thought before 2014 in regards to Europe. If we remember what Europe was like before 2014, there was so much cooperation between Europe and Russia, but also Europe and China. It was growing, and it looked inevitable that Europe was going to work its way out from under the shadow of American political capture, hegemony, primacy, whatever you want to call it. But then what happened? The United States violently overthrew the Ukrainian government. They started what was a festering war in Ukraine, and they drew Russia into this proxy war. And Russia launched its special military operation in 2022, and that served as the catalyst to force Europe, force them to decouple, because before that they weren't, or they only partially did. And so this is the exact same thing the U.S. is now putting into motion here in Asia. They know that Japan, South Korea, the U.S. is coercing them to do all of this. They themselves know this is not in their best interests. The business interests in these countries are not benefiting from this. They're still like opening factories in China to supply themselves with components for their manufacturing in country, in Japan, in South Korea, or factories in the region. But if the U.S. triggers a Ukraine-style conflict here in the region, that would serve as the same type of catalyst to force them to decouple from China, the same way Europe was forced to decouple from Russia. And the U.S., I don't know if there's any pipelines or maybe cables or something they can blow up or cut here in Asia to really cement it into place. But I'm sure that there are things that they're looking at in order to do that. And the threat of U.S. political interference, infiltration, and political capture still looms over all of these countries in the region. Thailand is building a high-speed rail link with China via Laos, which already has a high-speed rail line, again, courtesy of China. China is giving these countries infrastructure that the West for decades refused to give them. But there is, I still see the U.S.-backed political party walking up and down the streets every time there's local elections. They're still getting their money, like right now. They're doing it right. There's local elections, and they're out in the streets campaigning right now. That's still going on. There are still professors in Thai universities brainwashing Thai youths who have been part of U.S. programs, are receiving U.S. money. So this is a process that is still taking place. It is a looming danger. Just as the U.S. succeeded in wrecking Europe, they are still capable of doing that in Asia. That is the threat. That is what I think multipolarism needs to double down on, exposing and confronting this soft power the U.S. uses to politically capture nations. Because if it was just up to a nation's best interests, the U.S. would have lost a long, long time ago in Europe and here in Asia.
Yeah, I agree. I believe that the United States is going to do a Ukraine model vis-a-vis China, although the timing of that is going to be incredible. It's going to take a lot longer, in large part because you're not talking about cutting off Russia. Russia's economy is very powerful. It's gotten a lot bigger, but a lot of that has come since the sanctions, actually. Before the sanctions, and even up until this day, we still are talking about a Russia that is mainly dependent upon exporting certain raw materials, and of course its military industrial complex has boomed, and now some Russian people, very pro-Russia people, which I would consider, I am for Russia's sovereignty, but they would say, oh, well, what about the passenger jets? What about these? Yes, Russia's economy is developing very fast, but it is dependent upon exporting oil and other kinds of resources in that way. It is not a manufacturing powerhouse yet. China, however, is the globe's manufacturing powerhouse. And actually, Asia as a whole is the world's manufacturing powerhouse. So to cut off China and the rest of Asia from themselves is going to be a very difficult feat, because if you do that, unlike sanctions on Russia, which had a very bad effect on the world economy, but it's going to be a lot worse when you're talking about these. We already just saw with the tariffs, just the threat of full decoupling between the U.S. and China was going to send the United States into recession, which is why Donald Trump is doing the market manipulation. Not just because he wants to make money, which is people's theory, but it's because the United States cannot afford to go into a manufactured recession right now politically for the Trump administration. And of course, all the damage it could cause, unpredictable damage it could cause. So in many respects, yes, this is a strategy. It's going to be very complicated, which is why my fear is that it will spiral into, if not stopped, the United States moving toward a position of, I mean, it has nuclear first use policy, moving into, well, we're at this existential stage. We can't go any farther. We can't fight them militarily. We can't fight them economically. Oh, look, we have this bomb and we just need a reason. We just need a way. And hell, the United States came very close with Russia in the Ukraine conflict toward building up toward that end. So any thoughts on this, Brian, before we get on to audience questions?
Yeah, I don't think people should underestimate just how far the U.S. is willing to go to achieve this. And we know now, because of admissions in the Western media, that the U.S. considered using nuclear weapons during the Korean War, the Vietnam War, even the war in Afghanistan.
The Taiwan.
Yeah. Oh, yes. The Taiwan Strait crisis also. So why wouldn't they think about using it again as they get more and more desperate? The other thing that is scary is that this whole economic war they're waging on China, they know is destroying the American economy, especially not for the billionaires. We all know that they'll always be okay. That's the only welfare that actually exists in the United States, is for billionaires. But the ordinary people and the cost of living, like Danny, you're in the U.S. I don't need to tell you. I have family members that are still in the U.S. and that's all they tell me is how the cost is going up. You know, what is President Trump doing about any of this? Nothing. He doesn't care. And the tariffs, he knew, because this is what caused it in the first place. The tariffs during his first administration, the Biden administration cooperating with the Trump administration, continuing and expanding on those tariffs. That is why you have a cost of living crisis. And that is working its way into other areas of the economy. And that's just going to make it worse and worse. What the U.S. believes is that they cannot, they cannot compete with China. They will never surpass China. They cannot rebuild themselves and innovate and outcompete China. Even if they, all things equal, China still has 4 to 5 times the population of the US. This is just never going to happen. So what is their actual strategy? It's to destroy everything and hope that they can come out best positioned to rebuild, which sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie or something. But this is what's going on in their head as they get desperate. Because the one thing they won't accept is, again, a proportional role in the world, where just like in China, you could be a billionaire, you could be rich, you can have your yacht, and also the people who are buying your products can, eat healthy food and go to the hospital when they're sick and get maternity leave and things like that. Like, everybody could win. But in their mind, that's not how the world works. It's a zero-sum game of domination and subordination. And as long as that's the virus, that's the real mind virus infecting America. As long as that persists.
This is true.
Yeah, we all suffer.
Yeah. I mean, 100% true. It's the United States is as not, a lot of people criticize, oh, why you want the United States? Yes, the United States elite, the empire, the oligarchy, however you want to call it, they're not sleepwalking. They are very wide awake. They are moving in a very wide awake fashion toward this war. And with this trade war, we just saw that zero-sum mentality explode. Of course, that always backfires on the United States, but they don't care. The elites, they don't care. They will continue to pursue this up until they exhaust everything. And then we have probably the biggest crisis that humanity's ever faced once that exhaustion occurs. But Brian, let us get to an audience question or two.
Sure.
How about we keep it on China? Brian, what do you know about China's thorium revolution?
I've been hearing about this. I've been hearing about thorium for many years. I think if anyone could actually make this a reality, it would be China. I think there's all kinds of, they're also working on fusion. Instead of fission, there's also fusion. They're working on that as well. And I think if anyone has a chance of succeeding, it will be China. China is pushing the boundaries of everything in ways that the U.S. could have been, but isn't, and could actually be working together with China to push. Imagine how win-win that would be for all of humanity, absolutely everybody.
Yeah, I can show an article from the South China Morning Post, Hong Kong-based. China is the world's first operational thorium nuclear reactor thanks to strategic stamina. Team working on project reportedly achieves milestone by completing fuel reloading while experimental molten salt reactor is running. Don't know what any of that means. Sounds all good, but I'll just read the first several paragraphs. Chinese scientists have achieved a milestone in clean energy technology by successfully adding fresh fuel to an operational thorium molten salt reactor, according to state media. It marks the first long-term stable operation of the technology, putting China at the forefront of a global race to harness thorium, considered a safer and more abundant alternative to uranium for nuclear power. The development was announced by the project's chief scientist, Xu Hongjie, during a closed-door meeting at the Chinese Academy of Sciences on April 8th, said the Guangming Daily on Friday. The experimental reactor, located in the Gobi Desert in China's west, uses molten salt as a fuel character and coolant, and thorium, a radioactive element abundant in the Earth's crust, as the fuel source. The reactor is reportedly designed to sustainably generate 2 megawatts of thermal power. And this is the big deal here. Some experts see the technology as the next energy revolution and claim that just one thorium-rich mine in Inner Mongolia could theoretically meet China's energy needs for tens of thousands of years while producing minimal radioactive waste. So, a big deal. That's a big accomplishment, and one that is absolutely out of the eyes and in purview of the United States right now, given the direction of the economy and state.
Yeah, they don't talk about any advancements in China. If you ask the average American, they think Chinese people are still riding around on bicycles, like in the night, like in that footage from the 70s and 80s. They'll never talk about the largest high-speed rail network on planet Earth, built between 2006 and 7 up until now. That was all done in just that short period of time. All the innovation and construction, the engineering feat that represents. They won't ever talk about that, and they will never talk about this. This is something that I am going to look into deeper, and if I think there's enough information, maybe I'll write an article on it and also do a video.
So let's do one more question. Monzar Chahab. Brian, walk us through what he thinks will happen between the U.S. and Iran. Thanks to Chili Pepper, and then thanks to Monzar. Brian.
I highly recommend people search for, just type in Brookings, Which Path to Persia, PDF in your favorite web search engine, and it is available for free to download. And the entire U.S. plan for Iran is there. And again, this isn't about, they admit in the paper, Iran doesn't want war with the U.S. or Israel. They want to be left alone. There's a Rand Corporation paper also that says it's purely for defense. If the best case scenario would be for Iran to just be left alone, but short of that, they just want the capability to build a bomb, not actually build the bomb, just have the capability and have that serve as a deterrent. And if they ever did have nuclear weapons, it would solely be for a deterrence. And they admit that in the policy paper that they are writing to draw up plans to lie about Iran, attack and overthrow the government. Because again, it is about domination and then creating appropriate pretext they think people are dumb enough to buy to sell it to the public. Just like they did with Iraq. And President Donald Trump, everyone's holding their breath waiting for President Trump, the peace president. He names Michael Anton to lead technical talks with Iran. This is via Politico. And who is Michael Anton? He's a Bush Jr. Admin. He was in the Bush Jr. admin. He lied about WMDs in Iraq. He's a former BlackRock managing director, and now he's in the Trump administration. What do you think he's going to do there? You think he had a come to Jesus moment, and now he's ready for peace with Iran, or he's there to play his role to lie about Iran and move this? And if you read the Brookings paper, it's about the U.S. appearing to be diplomatic while through back channels giving Israel everything it needs to carry out the attack on Iran. When Iran responds, the U.S. will then pretend to reluctantly wade into the war, which is what they were doing already. Do you remember Israel attacking an Iranian consulate in Syria and then attacking Iran itself, and how the U.S. was trying to carefully wade into that, doing it behind Israel, but wading into it incrementally. And this is their plan. So it's just a repeat. The whole Iran nuclear deal under Obama was in the Brookings 2009 Brookings paper, Which Path to Persia. And in it, they said, we'll offer them this deal. We have no intention of upholding it. We'll sabotage it. We'll blame it on Iran. And then we'll have a pretext to go to war. We would prefer to do it that way than to just out of the blue attack them. That would get us much support worldwide. So that is the plan. That was the plan under Obama. It was the plan under the first Trump administration, under Biden, and now under the second Trump administration. They're literally picking neocon warmongers from the past, guilty of war crimes from past administrations. He's picking these people and putting them in charge of his, fake negotiations with Iran now. It's so obvious, but at the same time, because people don't want to believe that this is happening, it's almost invisible to so many people. Danny, I think you're muted.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. My assessment is very similar to yours, Brian, and I believe if what we've seen from U.S. foreign policy over the last several decades, that there is no doubt that there will be escalations toward war with Iran. This is the plan. I mean, the plan, if there is such a thing for U.S. foreign policy, but there is an objective, even if the plan can get sidetracked and there's hiccups and there's anarchy because of the market and the way that capital behaves. But in truth, the only plan that U.S. foreign policy has that fits the objectives of its oligarchy is to get rid of these emerging powers. And now they assume that Iran is the weakest link. Iran is quite a strong weak link, given how long it has lasted and survived, and actually built up a pretty robust and challenging military capability that I think is one of the big sticking points as to, well, how does this happen? But I think we are going to see Israel at some point in the near future or medium future go on the assault against Iran, or attempt to, but it will have to have U.S. backing, and it will be very ugly. I mean, this is everything that's happening in West Asia, all of the axis of resistance versus the empire, all of that. I mean, all of it is to get to Iran. Hezbollah, even Palestine. Those are just impediments in the way. That's why they view them all as proxies, even if they're not really proxies, right? But Yemen, what the United States is doing in Yemen, it's all about getting to what really matters for the U.S. strategically as an empire, which is ensuring that there isn't an Iran that can be a model of stability for the rest of the region, because that model of stability has already had ramifications that are problematic to the United States empire, like, for example, what we are seeing, which I think is actually incredible in the sense that this highly sanctioned nation, pressured to collapse to such a high degree, has enormous ties with the emerging leaders of the multipolar world, or really the actual leaders. I keep saying emerging, but they're the actual leaders, China and Russia. And we see that not just on the economic front, but also on the political front, the diplomatic front. They are the ones who are kind of leading this multipolar world, and that's why Iran has to go. And so there's no doubt that that's going to happen. If we saw what happened with Syria, if we saw what happened with Iraq, and so many other countries and resistance movements in the region, they're eventually gonna go for it. It's just when and how. That's why Iran continues to build up its defensive capacity. And I think that's why Iran continues to negotiate and continues to act in quote unquote good faith. It's not being belligerent. It's not saying it wants a bomb. It's not trying to actually build a bomb. It's what it's doing is it is building up the capacity to defend itself and trying to get as much time as possible to do that. Because, I mean, every day we hear Israel wants to strike. Israel, come on, let's strike, let's strike, let's strike. U.S., please, please let us strike. And eventually the United States is going to say, okay. Now, whether it leads to all-out war, who knows? We saw just in the last 16 months, Israel do this a couple of times in Syria, and then, of course, on Iran proper. So, but nonetheless, I think that's the direction, and it's going to happen. When it does happen, it's ugly. And I think that's why the United States is trying to also build up to this to the extent possible that it can, using all the things that you said from the policy paper and all of the, I guess, all of the pillars and connections to that overall objective and posture needed for it. That's my assessment. It is going to be, I mean, people better get ready, because this is going to be maybe the task of people in the United States and the West, probably sooner than any other question, because I think Russia and China are in a far more advantageous position than Iran. So I think Iran is probably going to be the first target of an all-out kind of war, because there might be an assumption that it can be attacked. It's not Iraq, and it's not Afghanistan, and it's not any of these countries, so it'll be bad. It will probably be an existential crisis for the U.S. as well, but I think that's in the minds of the U.S. foreign policy club. That's where they're kind of aiming toward. Build up toward Russia and China, but hey, if we can get Iran first, let's get it.
Absolutely. And in the policy papers, they talk about the necessity of eliminating Syria and Hezbollah before isolating and then focusing on Iran. And that is exactly what they did so from Bush Jr., Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump, that they have handed it off from one president to the other, uninterrupted continuity of agenda. And that's where we are right now. They wiped out the senior leadership of Hezbollah. They have fully collapsed the Syrian government. The U.S. is openly attacking Yemen. And I hear people saying, President Trump really wants peace with Iran, but Israel's undermining it. They're going to attack and undermine these peace talks. Israel is incapable of waging war without constant and full U.S. support. And in the policy paper, it said there's a whole chapter titled "Leave It to Bibi," approving or agreeing to or they differentiate between openly agreeing to and greenlighting Israel carrying out an attack on Iran or doing it semi-covertly, like, well, we don't really want that, but obviously behind closed doors, we totally enabled it and facilitated it. So again, it's just like what they're doing to Russia with Ukraine. They're pretending that Ukraine is having this war with Russia when it's the U.S. waging war against Russia through Ukraine. The U.S. is waging war with Iran through Israel. It waged war with Syria through Turkey, Israel, other Persian Gulf states. And then when all else failed, they literally invaded eastern Syria themselves. And so this is what they're doing. And I completely agree with you, Danny. People better get ready for it. You know, and they even said it openly. Oh, look how weak Iran is. This is the best time for regime change. And then do you think President Trump, with all these warmongers in his administration that he himself picked, people are like, Trump wants peace, but he's got all these people in his administration holding him back. Who picked them? Who put them there? Who knew from day one that they were all warmongering neocons? Who is Marco Rubio? He's like one of the worst neocons that is still actually active in politics today. Who put him there? Trump did. So people gotta kind of get with it and see through this. Start speaking up against it, or else you're actually helping create this smokescreen. They're going to do all of this behind, and it's going to have devastating consequences for all of us, no matter where we are.
Yeah. And it's going to be profoundly because, I mean, Syria was really, I mean, that war was so long. And it was a dirty war, and it was a proxy war, an all-out war with Iran. The only thing stopping an all-out war with Iran is the fact that Iran was far more capable than Syria, and is getting more and more capable of fighting back. But that, I don't believe that in and of itself will stop the United States, which means that I mean, we're talking about a war that, I mean, I can't even imagine what it would look like, because we know what Iran has shown off, and what it's shown off like 10-15% of its capability, maybe less than that of its capabilities in these demonstrations over the last 16 months. But then you also have the fact that you just have so many factors in how the world would respond to such a thing. The energy, the what Iran can do in the region to make things difficult, and what the United States would have to do. In my estimation, even though Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, it might go as far as nuclear proliferation, nuclear confrontation, because the United States would be looking at a quagmire, the scale of Vietnam, but because that's how big Iran is, I mean, Vietnam was much smaller as a population when the U.S. actually waged war, but now it's 90+ million people. I believe Iran is 90+ million people, but Iran has a military far stronger than what the Vietnamese had back in, the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So we're talking about one of the most ugliest conflicts and wars in human history, and one that would be so damaging to the U.S. that, again, I go back to this. Well, how do these warmongers and war makers assess this? Well, they don't say, what, we got to stop. They say, how can we make it happen by other means? Or how do we keep the fact that we have, several thousand, 6,000, 7,000 nuclear warheads? Maybe we
Danny,
use one.
Israel has nuclear weapons.
Exactly. They have hundreds of nuclear weapons. Yes.
Yeah, they have nuclear weapons, and people have to think about this. It's so convenient for the U.S. because it would be like a nuclear strike on Iran without having to accept any responsibility for having carried it out, even though obviously the U.S. is complicit in everything Israel does. And this is why I warn people, and people are always And I know they're well-meaning, but they're always complaining about all of the restraint Iran shows. Iran knows that they have nuclear weapons. They know how, if you fall into this trap, they're trying to, and the policy paper, the Which Path to Persia policy paper, openly talks about goading. They literally use the word goad. Goad Iran into a war because they know they don't want it, because they know Israel has nuclear weapons. They know the U.S. wants this. They want this excuse to create this excuse. And they refuse to fall into the trap. And they said, we might even carry out a full-scale airstrike campaign on Iran, and they might still not do anything because they know that it is a trap. People need to read the policy paper. Yeah, people got to stop, because if you're just listening to politicians and their lies that they're telling the public, and you're not reading the policy papers, I know they're boring, they're long, but that is the blueprint. You can't do something this big, can't build a global empire without blueprints. The policy papers are the blueprint. Just read the policy papers. You will know exactly what they're going to do, and then you won't be tricked anymore. You won't fall. You'll see straight through all of this. I don't have some special psychic power. I just read. They write what they're going to do years in advance, and then they do it.
Yeah. Yes, they do, and it's their framing that's also so important, because I mean, just look at the threat assessment from the U.S. intelligence, the DNI, the Department of National Intelligence. All the U.S. intelligence agencies came together and said basically all the countries that we assume the United States have as its primary objective, China, Russia, DPRK, but Iran. In it, they say, Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, but Iran is very dangerous, and here's what must be done to weaken Iran, to contain Iran, to, in all the policy papers say exactly what you say, Brian, which is
who's the director of national intelligence, Danny?
It's Tulsi Gabbard, but she didn't write it, Brian. It was before her. It was written as the outcome, but overall, we know that it doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter what behind is in the seat if the vehicle you are driving is shaped like a nuclear warhead. I mean, that's just it is a nuclear warhead. That's what the United States' foreign policy is. That's all it is. You get into the vehicle and you are in the you are in the machine, you are in the weapon, the military industrial complex, and that's what you're forwarding. And so the Project Iran is going to be ongoing, and regardless of whether Trump has Nobel Peace Prize dreams or what have you, that will just be a temporary respite in a very long tenure. What do we have? What is it? 3 3.75 years to go. That's a long time.
Very fast. It's happening very fast. I thought it would take a lot longer. For a lot of people are starting to wake up that they were duped by Trump again. I mean, what did you think was going to happen? But okay, I get it. But a lot of people are waking up very, very fast. I thought it would take at least half a year or more for people to start to see through it, but it's happening very quickly.
Well, Trump is giving it. The contradiction here is that I think Trump is trying to give himself a long amount of a grand amount of time to, one, secure the midterm elections, and two, then after that, undo any kind of pause, respite, whatever you want to call it, freeze of these conflicts. If that's allowable and doable, if the people who actually control U.S. foreign policy say, okay, yeah, you can pause that, I get it, political expediency, blah, blah, blah. If Iran gets to be frozen by some kind of JCPOA Trump version, they're giving a lot of time for that to be ripped up in the same administration. I mean, that's how I see it. If there is a quote unquote deal that's done, I'm not convinced the deal is going to be done. But if that's where that was to happen, come on. What did we see with China? I say this all the time. Trump went to Beijing. He met with Xi Jinping. They signed a quote unquote trade deal. And then what happened by the end of his administration? The second half of his administration was a disaster from 2017, 2018 to 2020. It was constant escalations. First, economic war. You mentioned Huawei, Meng Wanzhou, the imprisonment, the sanctions, the military buildup, the encirclement, moving all these resources, aircraft carriers sailing through the Taiwan Strait, COVID, Hong Kong. I mean, on and on and on.
Yes.
And then that was it. He left, and then what did Biden do? Oh, let's make it worse. Let's constantly say that we're going to go to war over Taiwan. this is the game. And so we're in that game now. It's just we're at a different phase, and it can be maddening because this phase is the kind of quote unquote reset phase. It's let's reorient, rebrand, and then we can when the political moment is right, we can once again go for it. But any final thoughts, Brian, before we head out of here?
No, I think you summed it up really well. Just one last thing. It's also about when you go from one administration to the other, it's all about kicking the can down the road as far as keeping the American people at least partially invested in this process. As long as they keep clinging to hope that they can vote their way out of this, they're not going to actually do the things necessary to actually get out of this problem, which is just like multipolarism globally are creating alternatives to the corrupt corporate monopolies on Wall Street and who control Washington. People in America, people across the West need to start creating their own alternatives to these huge corporations. Stop giving your money to these corporations. Recognize that is the problem, not Washington. Washington is subject to Wall Street. Wall Street is the problem. Stop giving them your money. Start creating alternatives. Start paying into the multipolar world's existing companies and institutions, but also create your own that are part of it. And start pushing people, start, through the alternative media. Very important that we wake up to this, raise awareness for it, and spread this message so that people can start contributing rather than investing hope in a system that is designed to keep you engaged and helpless as it just continues. Like you say, you're just in the seat going along for a ride. Doesn't matter who you vote for. People saying, I remember people saying, well, if it was not Tulsi Gabbard, if it was Kamala Harris,
right,
it would be nuclear war. But now we're talking about, because people were talking about Israel nuking Iran, America might nuke Iran. So how is that different? How is Trump nuking Iran or some other country different than Kamala Harris nuking? So, again, so it doesn't matter who you vote for. We have to see the problem is not Washington is just answering to Wall Street. Wall Street is the problem. And the more people that wake up to that, the more people we will have to think about what to do about it.
Yeah, and someone on Patreon, I won't say your full name, but let's say Ibrahim said, "Are we all finished?" And I would say, no, we're not actually. The multipolar world is making sure that there is a foundation and actually a pretty robust defense, which is why this is taking so long. The United States would rather have, what was it, 7 countries in 5 years or something like that? The United States has that model for the entire world. It would much rather that China had been done in the 90s what they had hoped.
Yes.
They're like, oh, China will be done in the 90s because of neoliberalism and the market and blah, blah, blah. They would have rather happened it then. But guess what? It's 2025 and China is the most important economy doing things that the United States would much rather it not. So no, we're not finished. However, the dangers are is that as actually forces around the world build alternatives, and that could include us, we could be doing that. We could be fighting this albatross. We could be, moving forward. If we're for Palestinian freedom and liberation, we could be moving that even further, talk about the whole world, and then actually building up activities, organizations, and other institutions independent that can start to form this new world. But what's going to happen to that? Well, we just look at what happened to the protesters who just simply wanted a genocide to stop. They've been absolutely repressed. Columbia students, we're talking about we're talking about people of relative privilege. I mean, this is the face of the empire. So yeah, expect repression, expect pushback, expect war on all fronts, and prepare for it. And that's kind of where we have to be at. We can't just there needs to be a healthy dose of looking at the good moving forward, and also looking at the reality of what it means for people to build good in this world. Well, when you're living in a system that thrives off of the most heinous forms of warmongering and oppression, well, that's what that force is going to be met with. So we're always looking at both sides. So Brian, thanks so much. Everybody, new Atlas, it is in the video description. You can subscribe to his channel on YouTube. It's great. I make his live streams as much as I can. And so be sure to check him out, all of his videos there. Go to the video description also to find places to support this work, Patreon, Substack, and so much more. Hit the like button before you go. That helps keep the video going even after the live stream has ended. I'll let you know when I am live again very soon. But until then, everybody, take good care. Good night.